Hey guys, how's it going? My name is Greg Hogg and I'm back with another video on data science and machine learning. Today I'm going to be answering the question that is asked to me most often, which is Python versus R. For those of you that are familiar with my coding, you'll see that I code in Python and I don't code in R. So clearly I have a preference here most of the time, but I do know R. In fact, pretty much everything I do in Python, I probably could do in R in just a little bit more time, and sometimes I could do some things faster. So for a while, I'm going to compare Python and R and say where I like each better, but at the end, I'm going to give you the reason why I code in Python all the time. By the way, if you're looking to improve your skills or get a certification, look no further than right here. Well, actually, it's telling you to go down here. One of the biggest problems I have with R is actually not the language itself, but its whole ecosystem. You're pretty much going to use RStudio, and yes, you could use something else, but you're probably going to. And it looks really ugly. And even if you change a lot of settings, it feels wrong. And if you go to look up the documentation, it looks extremely old and it's not written very well at all. The Python documentation looks absolutely beautiful, and something like a Jupyter notebook, which again, you could use R for, but you're probably going to use RStudio, it just feels a lot better. They are both programming languages, and you can write just about any code to do anything you want with either of them. But they both have something they are better at than each other. I quite seriously mean it when I say Python is just better at doing stuff. And there's a lot of stuff that you'd want to do with a programming language that you can't do, or it's way slower to with a GUI or moving your Windows Explorer stuff around. It's just a lot easier to do that kind of thing in Python. And aside from learning like Bash or the Windows command line, other than like 3 commands using dir or ls to try and figure out what files are there, you're not going to want to learn those unless you really want to, because in my opinion, they are terrible. Say for example, you had a bunch of pictures and you wanted to organize them into a training set and a test set on your file system. Something like this is a lot easier on Python than R, even though you could do it in R too. Speaking of other programming languages, you may have to actually learn other ones. You may have to write C or C++ or JavaScript or Java or Scala code. And to do that, they're all kind of thinking in the same mindset that arrays are zero indexed. When you move into the R ecosystem, you're stuck thinking in R, where it's like, okay, it's a 1 index, now I write this kind of code. Yes, of course, there's a transition between every language, except it's a lot different going to R because you think fundamentally differently. And you might think like, oh yeah, no, it's not a big deal. It's a big deal. You get really thrown off, and it's going to take a lot of time wrapping your head around stuff. This is going to be extremely controversial, but I have a strong passion for writing code that looks good, and you cannot write Python code that looks bad. Python forces you to keep a consistent indenting, which is the best idea ever because it's not even cumbersome to write. It would be a very big problem if it was irritating to write it in this way that forces it to look good basically. But it feels natural that if you have a block of code, it's indented. You don't need these curly braces saying this is the start and this is the end of this block. It just moves in a bit, that's fine. And if for some reason your indenting starts to look bad, that's because you're indenting too much. And if that is the case, then it is a clear sign to you that you should be writing more functions instead of keeping indenting your code. I quite seriously forget how my code works within about 5 minutes of writing it. And so if you pick it up the next day or the next week and it doesn't look extremely good, you will probably never pick it up again and write the whole code all over again. More on the syntax, Python knows what data structures you're actually going to use, and it doesn't matter what application you're writing, you're always going to use a dictionary, an array, and maybe a set. In Python, you can build an array or a dictionary extremely quickly in a single line of code that is not even ugly. It actually looks good to make a complicated dictionary. Say you wanted to map the letters to their corresponding numbers in the ASCII system. This can be done in one line without a bunch of A, B, C's. It's extremely easy, and you will have to do stuff like this. Doing that in R is just terrible. What R is good at is data analysis and statistics. If you wanted to maybe make a hypothesis test or a confidence interval, or maybe look at the correlation between variables, of course you can do this in Python or Pandas, but it's a lot easier in R. So I think the fundamental divide comes from the fact that data science is an all-encompassing field that includes statistics, but that is not all of it. Data science, to me, is machine learning and making neural networks, which again, you can do in R, but it's going to make a lot of complicated code. You're going to need to not just make a neural network. There's going to be a lot of other tasks going on there, and it's a lot easier to use Python to do those things. So my recommendation is if you're mostly doing statistics, then use R. If you're going to do statistics as well as other stuff, mostly use Python and maybe switch to R if you're doing just the hypothesis testing stuff. And so the reason I use Python is because I am doing machine learning stuff and it's better for that. It's also better for web development and doing other tasks, and R is just not as good. And above all, the reason I code in Python every day is because I coded in Python yesterday and the day before that. And of course I know both languages, except if I'm constantly coding in one, because it's often easier for me because I already know the language, then I don't see a point of switching unless I really have to. It's going to take me a lot more time to figure out how to do something, even if it's better at doing something, just because I don't know how to do it already. Pick one and get really good at it. Subscribe if you're not already. Bye-bye.